Welcome to Family Life Stories. Today I am sharing my story. My name is Savannah Brooks. I am 23 years old, 5 years ago. I stood completely still in my family's living room in a quiet Seattle suburb, watching my father throw my Harvard acceptance letter into the stone fireplace, destroying my hard work just to force me to stay home and be a stepping stone for my younger sister Chloe. But before I tell you how I came back to that exact same living room 5 years later, driving a car worth more than their entire house, and delivering news that shattered their perfect illusion forever, please take a quick second to like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me down in the comments where you are watching from right now and what time it is where you live. To understand why my father was so ruthless that night, you have to understand the toxic dynamic in our house. My younger sister Chloe was always the undisputed center of the universe. She constantly dropped out of school and failed at every single business venture she tried, but my parents were perfectly willing to remortgage our family home just to fund her lavish lifestyle and delusional dreams. Meanwhile, I was just the invisible daughter. My perfect report cards and academic achievements were always hidden away in drawers because my parents were terrified of making Chloe feel bad about her own failures when they stood there and threw my college acceptance letters into the fire. I did not cry, and I did not scream, because I had learned a long time ago that in our house, any display of emotion would immediately be used as a weapon against me. If I broke down and showed them my pain, they would have won. They wanted me to accept my designated role as the ultimate backup plan, the quiet girl who sacrifices her entire life so her sister could artificially shine. So I stood there in the living room and gave them absolutely nothing. I watched my hard-earned future turn into ash with a completely blank face. They thought that destroying those physical pieces of paper would break my spirit and permanently trap me in a minimum-wage life, serving as her financial safety net. But they completely misunderstood who I was and what I was truly capable of. Later that same night, I went up to my narrow bedroom and waited in the dark until exactly 2 in the morning, listening as the television downstairs finally turned off and the house fell into a heavy silence. Once I was sure my parents were deeply asleep, I leaned forward and untied my left sneaker, slipping my hand inside to retrieve the thick envelope I had intercepted days ago and carefully hidden beneath the worn insole. It was an acceptance letter for a full academic scholarship to Oakbridge University in Chicago, the one true lifeline they had failed to find and destroy. Holding that official parchment in the faint glow of my desk lamp, I felt a cold and sharp clarity wash over my entire body. I packed a worn black duffel bag with just a few basic clothing items to survive and stuffed $400 of hidden graduation cash deep into my jeans pocket. Walking down the creaky wooden stairs, I moved like a ghost through the shadows. I gently placed my house keys on the kitchen counter right next to the coffee maker where my father would easily find them the next morning, feeling an overwhelming sense of finality as I walked out the back door into the freezing Washington night air. I walked 3 miles in the dark past perfectly manicured suburban lawns until I reached the harsh fluorescent lights of the bus terminal. I bought a one-way ticket to Chicago and boarded the bus without looking back. During the long and exhausting ride across endless blurred highways, I stayed completely awake. I did not shed a single tear because crying is something you only do when you know someone is there to catch you when you fall. And I knew with absolute certainty that I only had myself to rely on if I broke. Stepping off that bus into the overwhelming noise and towering skyscrapers of downtown Chicago hit me like a physical force, but the initial adrenaline quickly faded when I double-checked my admission paperwork and a cold dread settled deep in my chest. My academic scholarship completely covered my housing, but move-in day for the university dormitories was still 2 agonizingly long weeks away. I was suddenly stranded in a massive city with absolutely no support system and a little over $300 left in my worn pockets. Those first 14 days were not about living, but pure endurance. I spent my nights hiding out inside a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city, ordering the cheapest cup of black coffee and making it last for hours just so I could briefly rest my heavy eyes without being kicked out into the freezing wind. I learned how to sleep in fragmented 10-minute intervals with my arms wrapped fiercely around my only bag. I washed my face in dimly lit public restrooms and counted every single penny to buy the cheapest plain bagels I could find just to keep my exhausted body moving. I was terrified almost every single second of every day, but underneath that constant gripping fear was an iron will that was completely unbreakable. I made a silent vow to myself during those dark nights that I was going to become so massively successful and undeniably powerful that my family would never be able to ignore my existence ever again. When move-in day finally arrived, and I started my classes at Oakbridge, my scholarship covered the tuition, but I still needed to survive the crushing cost of living in the city. So I immediately took on an overnight shift at the campus library and a brutal morning rush shift at a local coffee shop, pushing my body to the absolute edge of physical exhaustion just to keep my head above water. But one fateful morning, while wiping down the espresso machine, I overheard two wealthy investors in tailored suits complaining loudly about a massive $10 million loss. They desperately needed a predictive tool that could flag the behavioral warning signs of emotional and desperate founders before a startup completely collapsed. My hands froze on the counter because I suddenly realized I was already building exactly what they were looking for. I had spent the last year secretly turning Chloe's endless parasitic failures and impulsive spending patterns into a massive foundational data set to try and make sense of my parents' blind financial ruin. Rushing back to my tiny dorm room, I dove headfirst into teaching myself advanced Python programming late in. I obsessively transformed my personal tracking system into a highly complex predictive algorithm designed to analyze thousands of financial behaviors and decision-making patterns. After months of relentless testing and refining, I finally created a powerful model that could accurately identify an impending corporate collapse months in advance with an unprecedented 94% accuracy rate. Knowing exactly how much power my system held but completely lacking the high-level network required to get it into the right hands, I decided to aggressively target Madeline Pierce, a notoriously ruthless managing partner at Pierce Capital who built her fearsome reputation on high-risk acquisition. Discovering that she was scheduled to give a guest lecture on my university campus, I knew this was my one chance to force the moment and make it impossible for her to ignore me. After watching her completely dismantle the business models of terrified students during her presentation without ever raising her voice, I quietly slipped out the back of the auditorium and waited near the private VIP elevators. As she approached with her assistant, I boldly stepped past them and slipped inside the elevator just as the heavy doors began to close. Ignoring her assistant's attempt to stop me, I looked directly into her cold and evaluating eyes and confidently declared that I had built a predictive algorithm that tracks the behavioral patterns and emotional instability behind massive financial failures. I boldly told her that I had turned my own family's disastrous financial ruin into a foundational dataset that could accurately predict corporate collapse months in advance. She did not look surprised or annoyed, but simply studied me with a deeply calculating gaze. Right as the elevator reached the lobby, she calmly instructed her assistant to cancel her next meeting and demanded that I show her the data, and by the very next morning, I was officially hired as a paid intern working directly under her elite data team at Pierce Capital. For the next 2 relentless years, I lived in a state of constant exhaustion, dedicating over 60 hours a week to Pierce Capital while desperately trying to maintain my grueling academic scholarship. Madeline was a ruthless mentor, tearing apart every mistake but pushing me incredibly hard because she actually saw my raw potential instead of just my weakness. Eventually, we deployed my fully completed predictive system in real-world scenarios, and it successfully flagged multiple catastrophic investments months in, saving the firm tens of millions of dollars in potential losses. That was the exact moment everything shifted again. Madeline called me into her corner office and placed a massive term sheet right in front of me, offering $2 million in seed funding to scale my software globally, but it came with one absolute condition. I had to drop out of university immediately, realizing that the basic safety of a college degree was no longer enough to protect me. I signed the contract without hesitation, walking away from my hard-earned scholarship to build an untouchable empire. By the time I turned 23, my proprietary software company was acquired by a global banking conglomerate for over $15 million, and I was proudly named the youngest junior partner in the history of her prestigious firm. But while I was rapidly ascending to the absolute peak of the financial world and moving into a luxury penthouse, my family was quietly collapsing into a dark abyss. Through my own private investigations, I discovered that Chloe had burned through all of their savings and taken out predatory high-interest loans to fund a completely useless luxury pet food app, pushing my parents to the very edge of total financial ruin. One afternoon, while sitting in my corner office, a heavy leather-bound business pitch surprisingly landed right on my desk. It was a desperate funding request for a useless app, and the founder listed on the cover was none other than my sister Chloe. As I quickly scanned through the disastrous financials, my system immediately flagged a catastrophic amount of waste. She had already burned through $300,000 on luxury office spaces without actually building a functional product. But the most devastating detail was buried deep in the fine print. To keep this illusion afloat, she had taken out a predatory high-interest loan, and my parents had I could have easily sent a clean rejection email right then to end it all, but simply letting a faceless bank take everything away from them felt way too easy. I wanted to look my father right in the eyes when his perfect illusion finally shattered, so instead of outright rejecting the deal, I instructed my assistant to invite them all the way to our corporate headquarters in Chicago to present their pitch in person to a silent partner. I was meticulously setting the ultimate trap for them to walk right into. But let me pause for a quick second. If you think I was completely right to refuse to save the toxic family that once destroyed my own future, then please drop a number 1 down in the comments below and let me know if you would have done the exact same thing. On the morning of the meeting, I dressed in a sharp white tailored suit and sat calmly at the head of the massive glass boardroom table, deliberately positioning myself against the backlight so my face was obscured in the shadows when the heavy doors finally swung open. My father Richard and my sister Chloe confidently stepped into the room with wide and practiced smiles, expecting to easily win over a wealthy new investor, but the exact second the light shifted and my face came into clear view, my father stopped dead in his tracks, and his arrogant smile instantly vanished. His hands began to shake uncontrollably as he tried to process the impossible reality that the daughter he threw away was now the powerful partner holding his entire future. Without giving them a single second to speak, I opened their black folder and coldly began to dismantle their desperate illusion piece by piece. I ruthlessly exposed their disastrous spending habits, fake luxury marketing expenses, and the impending default on their predatory loan, showing them undeniable proof of their inevitable financial collapse. Desperate to regain his lost power, my father slammed his hand on the table and angrily demanded that I show respect and approve the funding immediately because I owed this family. But I did not flinch or back down. I looked him dead in the eyes and calmly reminded him that this was not his house and he had absolutely no control over me. I officially rejected their pathetic business proposal and walked right out the door, leaving them sitting there completely paralyzed in utter pain. Instead of simply letting a faceless bank foreclose on their home, I secretly purchased all of their outstanding debt. I drove a luxury sports car back to my childhood house and hand-delivered the legal documents proving that I was now their sole creditor. I gave them exactly 30 days to pack up and move out, proudly announcing that I would completely demolish the house to build a non-profit center dedicated to helping displaced youth. I completely destroyed my dark past and finally found true freedom. If you were in my exact shoes, would you have stayed to endure the pain or chosen to leave and save yourself? If this story touched your heart, please drop a like and share this video so this message reaches anyone who desperately needs the courage to change their life. Thank you for listening to the very end.